Why did the Russian Ministry of Defense confirm the current situation in Russia? They reported that Ukrainian forces attacked Russian positions in the Kursk region with 11 tanks, 22 armored vehicles, and up to 300 men early in the morning. Why did they confirm this? How might Putin react? Well, it was definitely brought to his attention, although most likely the intelligence reported it earlier. Now, the movement of equipment and personnel is almost impossible to conceal, so I think they had certain information, and they were really waiting for the impact of our groups. This is most likely still a reconnaissance group, reconnaissance company, or reconnaissance battalion, depending on the task at hand. It's combat reconnaissance at this point. Despite significant forces, it's still combat reconnaissance rather than a DRG. The main goal is to draw enemy reserves from the Eastern Front to the north, benefiting both our position and the Eastern Front. The General Staff made this decision due to the challenging situation. How the Russians will respond is now up to them.
Потому Генштабом было принято такое решение. Ну, а россияне как будут действовать? Это они сейчас будут принимать решения.
That's the information flow of confirmation. Where are they going to go? They understand perfectly well that with the amount of information that is now pouring into the airwaves, especially through Telegram channels and YouTube, they have the task of limiting the speed of YouTube and eventually turning it off. That is, they are trying to reduce the amount of information coming into the Russian information stream. Just in what sense do you trust the numbers? This is not a movement of 3,000 Ukrainian troops, but in the neighborhood of several hundred, which in principle can be understood. And sometimes the Russians increase the number of troops on purpose. That is, roughly speaking, if there was a company there, they write that there was a battalion there, showing their participation or some kind of counteraction. Not a quick counteraction. There is a mechanism of retreat under the pressure of a superior enemy. Can you imagine Russia, whose territory is wider than 100 kilometers, population more than 100 million, army more than 2 million, of which 500,000 are in the occupied part of Ukraine, and there are 100 or 300.
Территории там по ширине до 10 тысяч километров, больше 100 миллионов населения, армии больше 2 миллионов, полмиллиона из которых находятся на оккупированной части Украины. И тут 100 или 300, даже если...
Even if 300 men of the armed forces of Ukraine seized Russian territory, it is like a blow to them, i.e., they are seizing native Russian lands. Save the predators. Well, this is roughly what it looks like, because in the information flow, the Russians will try to maneuver until they get everything back. That is back to the starting problems that our armed forces are now creating on other parts of the front. For some reason, all sides still call this the border, although it should be the front. Mr. Romani, the reserves are already being transferred to the Kursk region. The Russian Ministry of Defense officially announces this. How can it change the map of combat operations nowadays, and should we expect an attack from our side on any of the strains? The redeployment of reserves benefits us, as it helps relieve pressure on our Eastern Front. It's crucial that they withdraw at least one brigade from the Eastern Front to ease the strain on our forces. If they don't transfer enough, we'll deploy more troops to prompt further redeployments. Moreover, it is one thing to transfer from the Eastern Front and another thing to carry out certain fortification measures. The Russians have not carried out any fortifications along the borderline, the northern border, which they still consider to be a border from their point of view. So they will have to dig in, rebuild certain defensive mechanisms, and create a line of support.
естественно, создавать линию
And what is the
обеспечения.
supply line now?
Такой линии обеспечения.
Imagine what a blow it will be for the Russians. The Russians are mining Russian territory, and they will have to mine, that is, realizing that there will be pressure from this side, they will have to mine Russian territory. This war has come, including to the Russian Federation.
В том числе и в Российскую Федерацию, сами хотели, то есть просили 10 лет просили, вот давно их не били, давно не.
They wanted it and have been asking for it for 10 years. After a long period of being beaten and having to mine their own territory, here it is. Like giving a grenade to a fascist? The ongoing topic has drawn significant criticism from Z-patriots and Russian military leaders. Do you think we should anticipate a shakeup in the Kremlin, the General Staff, or the Ministry of Defense? Could these changes potentially end the SWO due to internal pressure? No, there will be no purges. Everyone is well aware of the situation, and the lack of fortification was intentional. Moscow, as we discussed, there's hardly any significant defense in that direction. One brigade could reach Moscow with a single refueling, but no one would risk such a mission just to see Moscow and die.
По крайней мере, может дойти с одной заправкой до Москвы. Сколько там езды-то? 500 километров, по большому счету. То есть с перезаправкой и не более одной. Потому просто зачем это нужно? То есть туда дойти и остаться, увидеть Москву и умереть, никто этого, конечно, делать не будет.
The direction lacks proper fortifications and sufficient forces, allowing the Ukrainian Armed Forces and Commander-in-Chief Syrsky to exploit the gap. For the past decade, 600 kilometers of the front were essentially unprotected. They should have directed their efforts toward Moscow earlier for more significant results. The likely reason for this inaction from Moscow is previous agreements. In recent years, fighting was mainly on the left bank of the Oskol, and no military operations occurred on the right bank before the Russians moved into the Kharkov area.
Боевые действия проводились даже последние 2 года в основном на левом берегу Оскола. Вот заметьте, до движения россиян в районе Харькова до сих пор непонятно, зачем они это сделали, но до выполнения ими каких-то боевых действий в районе Харькова на правом берегу Оскола
There were border guards, and while there was active conflict on the left bank of the Oskol, nothing happened on the right bank. This raises suspicions of possible agreements. The Russians advanced into Ukraine from the left bank towards Kupinsk, but did not progress on the right bank. Now it seems that after agreements, potentially influenced by Biden, collapsed, military actions that should have been initiated years ago are finally being carried out. Poroshenko should have signed and created fortifications along the borderline, putting it into frontline mode. Not a line, not Yatsenyuk's wall to build, but a specific security strip with mines, with a full lining of 3 thieves per kilometer and so on. Something that should have been done, but now it is better late than never. We are now catching up with these actions.
Не Минск-1, Минск-2 Порошенко должен был подписывать, а создавать фортификационное сооружение вдоль линии границы, переведя ее в режим линии фронта. Не линию, вернее, не линию, не стену Яценюка строить, забор разворачивать, а конкретную полосу обеспечения с минированием совсем, с полной выкладкой, по 3 ВОПа на километр и так далее и тому подобное.